Hey, now it is the Rob from 1061 KISS FM here with my 16-bit colleague.
Hey guys, it's me, Steve, web contributor to 1061 evansville.com. And you can play by yourself as long as you don't play with yourself.
That's right, you can. I think proving once again, you especially, the best dressed podcast on the internet. Without a doubt. Is that Tiffany Amber Thiessen?
Yep, Kelly Kapowski, the hottest girl at Bayside.
Absolutely she was. You and I agree on that for sure. One thing we may not agree on, though, is video games. And that's where this blog comes into play, the 16-bit superstars, where we cherish old games.
Yes.
Now, Steve, we've been focusing on a different console every day, or I guess every episode here for the past several weeks. Now we're moving into the 32-bit era. And there were a few consoles in that generation. The first we're going to talk about one that made a very lasting impression. Debuting in the 32-bit generation was the PlayStation.
Yes.
You can call it PlayStation, you can call it PSX, you can call it PS1, but a rose by any other name would still smell just as sweet.
Yes.
Steve, there are some great games that were only playable on the PlayStation. Can you think of one?
I can think of three.
Well, yeah, we've got three, but throw one out there for us.
First one I'm going to throw out there is Metal Gear Solid.
Top of many people's #1 PlayStation games. That was a game I heavily considered. I had that game, a fantastic game. Please tell us more.
This was really, PlayStation was me getting into the campaign-style games, the war, the first-person shooter. Not that this is really first-person shooter, but that genre.
Sure.
This is where I really kind of get into it. Just you're playing as Solid Snake, and you're sneaking around doing ops, trying not to get noticed, killing people. Basically, it's war without the fear of casualty.
It did, I feel like, while it may not have been the very first stealth game,
yeah,
it was the first huge stealth game.
Yes.
That's like the first stealth game I ever played. Trying not to get noticed, sneaking, hiding in boxes, and
yes,
that sound that go whoop every time you get noticed. Like, I love stuff like that. So that is a great choice. The third on my list is a game I feel a little dirty putting on this list because I didn't play the game as a kid. I didn't play it until recently, but it sits on the top of many people's favorite PlayStation games list as well. I started playing it probably around 2011. It's called Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Mm-hmm. And people compare the game... Have you ever played it?
Yes.
People compare the game to a Metroid-style gameplay, which I agree with.
Yes.
And I love, and it was such a huge castle, a huge environment. I love the way you leveled up, but didn't feel like an RPG. It took that Metroid-style gameplay, but turned it on its face. There was so much you can do, and once you actually learn about the game, there are so many hidden secrets in the game, and the way it combines folklore and monster lore, and man, I thought that game was just a masterpiece. But the most important thing, so fun to play. If you had asked me a few years ago to put a list like this together, I'd have never played Symphony of the Night, but now that I have, it is my third favorite PlayStation 1 game.
All right.
All right, Steve, what's number two?
Number two, going into another realm that me and you love, wrestling. I'm going to go with WWE SmackDown.
Oh, SmackDown, the first one?
Yes.
I had that game. Go ahead, induct it.
It just, I mean, not a lot to say. Obviously, you're wrestling. I think it's one of the first, if not the first, that introduced the story mode. And on a personal experience, it was the first time I ever won a championship thanks to a glitch, wrestling an invisible character.
Very cool. Wrestling games I considered putting on my list include WCW vs. the World.
Yes.
I believe was the name of that game. It had a weird roster of wrestlers, but it introduced that style of game that kind of eventually turned into WrestleMania 2000 and No Mercy that I really appreciated. And also the WWF WrestleMania, the arcade game. But that was on many systems, but I thought the premiere was on PlayStation, which is what I played it on. My second favorite game for the PlayStation 1 is a game that is another one I feel like the most common answer for people's favorite PlayStation game is this one. And this is also sticking to a one game per franchise rule because there are a few different games from Final Fantasy on PlayStation 1. But the first one, Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that game was massive. And it was a very important game in the battle in the 32-bit war because it was originally supposed to be a Nintendo game, but Nintendo, the deal went south. Also, they didn't want to put it on a cartridge. They wanted to put it on a CD, and they wound up putting it on 3 CDs. Final Fantasy VII, Cloud, and Aeris, and the story they told, my goodness, that was the way RPGs were supposed to be played,
yes,
and are continued to be played in today's generation. Never played a Final Fantasy VII or a Final Fantasy game? They're not for you, are they?
At the risk of getting hate emails, I have never once played a Final Fantasy game.
They're not for everybody. RPGs aren't for anybody. Maybe you should give them a shot someday.
I should.
Okay, Steve, number 1. What is your favorite PlayStation 1 game?
Okay, one thing I love about me and you is we're both very much gamers, but we're so different. I mean, just like Final Fantasy. My number 1 is a Steve number 1. It's a number 2. It's Tekken 2.
Really?
Yes.
Tekken is your favorite game on the PlayStation?
On the PlayStation. The exclusive. When we brought this up, the first game that came to mind was Worms. Because we've talked about Worms Armageddon and Worms,
see,
but that was an exclusive.
Yeah, and I don't consider that a PlayStation game.
Yeah.
I consider that like a PC game.
Yeah.
So I'm with you there. Worms, oh my gosh. One of my top 5 favorite games of all time is Worms.
But Tekken 2 is my favorite PlayStation exclusive game.
Okay.
Again, it's
a great franchise of games.
Yeah, just again a one-on-one fighter. But I think it just kind of brought something new with the new technology. My go-to character is Heihachi. But yeah, I love Tekken 2. I could play it forever.
Sure.
And it induced the first Steve breaking stuff tirade.
What does that mean?
When you get to a character called the Devil, he's a little hard to beat, and I may have thrown a controller and smacked a Coke can or 2 in my day.
Fair enough. Let me tell you about my favorite. My number 1 favorite PlayStation 1 game happens to be my second favorite game of all time. My number 1 is Link to the Past. We've mentioned that before.
Yes.
Number 2, and my favorite PlayStation 1 game is a game, now this has been replicated on many other systems, but it originated at home on the PlayStation 1, Resident Evil.
Oh my goodness.
Keeping to just 1 game per franchise, I'm inducting the first one, although the second one and even the third game are great.
Yes.
Resident Evil 1, in my opinion, invented the survival horror franchise. One of my all-time favorites. I love horror movies, and I love horror video games. And this was the first one to really break that door open. Still delivers the goods. Still, when I go into the Arkley Mountains and into that mansion, that haunted house, so to speak, especially before it gets all sci-fi and you're just in the mansion shooting zombies, I still get scared being in that mansion. The definitive edition of this game exists on the GameCube, I think, when they remade it on the GameCube. But still, you cannot deny. Oh, and you had limited saves, and you had every bullet counted.
Yes.
In Resident Evil. Have you played that game?
Oh
right?
yeah, I love that game.
Jill Valentine, I feel like is my favorite character in video games because I felt like I was her exploring that mansion, and when she takes a long time to open the door because she's timid, that's me. When she's shooting a zombie, I feel like I'm shooting a zombie.
Yes.
I really related to her, and I felt like I was controlling her when I was in that game.
Yes.
So those are our favorite. This time we had 6 unique games.
Yes, we did.
So thank you for tuning in. And you know what's next, Steve? The Nintendo 64.
One of my favorites.
We will be talking about the 3 best games, maybe even compile a list of 6, next week on the 16-Bit Superstars. For myself and for Steve,
thanks, guys.